that's looking good. Because this is some wood. So I'm back indoors. I did actually do a video outside, but it was extremely wet. Maybe I'll pop some pictures of the footage of the river in. It's all flooded down here, so there's no way to get through, and it's quite windy, so you couldn't hear anything. So I'll try and condense what I had in the video for the sinking tree into this. So the thought was it was different ways, ideas and ways, philosophies and ways of seeing the world. For the materialist, reductionist, scientific view of the world now is that this stuff, whatever, this stuff is substance, this is matter, and we have a whole system of science based on how we can investigate and look at this matter. And as yet we haven't found the matter, unfortunately. A bit embarrassing. Never mind. Because the more we look, the more it seems to disappear into a point beyond a point where it's no longer measurable, or where it seems to disintegrate into nothing. So the most we can say is that we have energy, whatever that is, and the energy takes on mass depending on its environment, and that's what we call matter, which is a bit sort of dodgy, to say the least. So, and then we have other theories like quantum field theory, where you have a field. If the field were completely inactive, there would be no energy released, therefore no chance for energy to gain mass and become matter, therefore no particles. But the field has oscillations, has vibrations, is active, and so this activity creates quasi-particles, particles that appear to appear, and when we go and try and measure those particles, the moment of the measurement gives us the particle. There's nothing we can say about the particle a priori to the measurement. It seems to come out of nothing and to disappear back into nothing. So out of a nothing field. Vedanta says this world is the least conscious of the worlds, or this state is the least conscious of the state. So we would say this is the real world, then we fall asleep and there's a weird dream state which is a bit surreal and wacky, man. Yeah, and then there's deep sleep where you're just not conscious anymore. You're all conscious activity of the mind is turned off and you're just not present, right? And therefore you sort of cease to be until you wake up the next day, if you wake up the next day, because presumably consciousness then stops after you die. This is the way around we see the world. And Advaita would flip that around and see it from the other side and say, no. There is the deepest state of consciousness, the most real state of consciousness, which would be death. Because you're not limited by a finite mind that thinks it's finite and therefore cannot experience the infinite. So when that thing is dissolved, you're back in the infinite, and that would be the most conscious state, where you experience the field of consciousness, free of any of the manifestations in the field that are attractive to another manifestation, which is the finite mind. So there's the field of consciousness. The field of consciousness seems to localize into a point, right, like a particle, and it thinks I am a separate thing, looks around itself, and it sees other separate things. Nāmarūpa, a world of name and form. And it starts naming things. There's this, there's that. and it exists for a certain amount of time, like a particle. Pilot theory. It sort of rolls along on the surface of the field, experiencing things, and then at some point it disappears. That's birth, life, death. And they would say, yeah, but a conscious field is predominantly inactive with pockets of activity, and those activities produce these localizations that think that they are finite and see the world thus. Rather like a body of water which is perfectly still, there are no waves, there is no activity and therefore no waves. When there's activity in the water, waves appear, and some of those waves will become conscious, so they have a finite existence and take on a finite form. They look around, they see plenty of other waves, they say, oh, there's a wave there, I'm going to call this wave this, and then But when the activity dies away, all waves disappear, because all waves were never there. All waves were only ever the water. So the waves were manifestations of activity in the water. All of this is manifestations of activity in consciousness, in the consciousness field. So the real state of being is the conscious field, in which you can would access automatically after death, although some versions of Hinduism might say there are levels to that as well. There are bardos in Tibetan Buddhism where the soul goes to wait and blah blah blah. But ultimately, that would be the most inactive state, and therefore the purest state. If I'm in deep sleep, my finite mind, which is a manifestation of activity of consciousness, and the world around me is the same, becomes less active, and therefore the Nāmarūpa, the names and the forms, become less active, and I fall into a point where there's no memory anymore, because memory is connected to thought, and there is no time, because thoughts create time. So I have no memory of this state, but I am nevertheless aware, I'm nevertheless conscious. Conscious not from the point of view of the finite mind, I can remember anything, but consciousness is still there. And I am still in a state of consciousness. That consciousness field, it doesn't go away. And to prove that my finite mind is still conscious, I wake up the next day. If I don't wake up the next day, I stay in the state of consciousness ad infinitum, being the only thing that would be eternal, because all other forms, like the waves on the water, are temporary. All forms we know are temporary. Point to anything you can think of that is not temporary in this universe. Everything is temporal. Everything is here for a certain amount of time. It might be a long amount of time, galaxies, black holes that exist for hundreds of billions of years, whatever. But eventually, they are finite and they will disappear. But all of this, we, ourselves, are temporal manifestations in the field. The only thing that is not temporal is the field. The thing in which all of the manifestations appear is the thing that would be eternal. That has no form, that is not a thing. Because the things appear in it. The time-related things appear in a timeless space, a timeless field. Manifestations in a field, they are not the field. Well, they are the field's activity. So that's the next thing. So I'm in deep sleep, and for my finite mind, there is a wave of activity that's come through, because I am, my finite mind it's the conscious field, consciousness field. So there's a wave of activity, and in my finite mind, the activity starts to take on Nāmarūpa, name and form, and I see myself in New York with David Bowie in a cafe having coffee. And that becomes more and more real, right? And I'm in the world, and I'm there, and I can drink the coffee, and it's hot, and it's raining outside, and. Name and form, name and form. But if I were to stop and look at the table at which we're sitting and feel the table, it would appear solid to me. If I take the table and examine it and try and find, my finite mind would confabulate a perfectly reasonable description of the table. Oh, it's made up of this, it's made up of fibers, it's made up of molecules, it's made up... But eventually, the table would fall apart in my fingers because it's dream stuff. Because I'm not in a cafe with David Bowie in New York. I'm in a dream. It's activity of an infinite mind, and the forms are not real. And I realize this when the activity becomes more and more and more in the finite mind, and I'm awake and I realize, oh, it was a dream. I was never with David Bowie in a cafe in New York, but it seemed so real. But that's okay, because now I'm in the real world, ta-da-da-da, where everything's real. So that's fine then, isn't it? I'm not in a cafe in New York with David Bowie, but I am sitting here with real stuff. Unfortunately, when I take this real stuff and take it apart, it does the same thing it does in dreams. It disappears under my very fingers and becomes insubstantial and disappears back into the field in exactly the same way it did in the dream. But it appears so real. And were there to be a state of hyper-awareness and hyperactivity beyond the waking state, which there may well be, then this state might seem as unreal as the dream state with David Bowie in New York. So this would be the least real state, the name where name and form becomes extremely substantial, more so than a dream, but less real. The illusion becomes more and more entrancing, and we become more and more, the finite mind becomes more and more fascinated with, obsessed with the illusion of itself and the other things. And so this becomes our description of reality. It's less so in the dream, but still there. Deep sleep, the activity of thought and mind are such that thought can not be created and see itself, and therefore there's no time. So deep sleep is timeless, because time is an activity, is a property of thought, or a property of a finite mind thinking. And after deep sleep there would be death, which would be the permanence, no time, timeless, spaceless, no manifestations, timeless state of being, but not being a finite form. See, this is the difficulty with language. So a state of being that is inherent in all things, but not the state of being that you associate with this finite body. I am this. I am this. But rather, I am present. Not I am present as an object, but I am presence conscious. So they would see it completely the other way around. So this world, albeit that it's very nice and interesting, again, it's an illusion, not an hallucination. So it's not to say that these things are not here. The waves on the water are there, but they are a temporary manifestation of the activity of the water. These things are a temporary manifestation of the energy or the activity of the thing that produces them, which is consciousness. But they're not real in the sense that we presume them or find them to be real. And demonstrably not, because our senses are faulty. We can't sense all of the world, we can't sense all of the things going on around us, and we can't measure the stuff because it doesn't allow itself to be measured. It falls apart in our fingers in the same way dream stuff does. So the world we live in, for the Vedantist mind, is the other way around. This is the least real. This is the least thing to worry about. Don't worry about this world. Don't worry about all the happenings in this world. It's all very nice and it's all very well and good and fine. But there is an understanding that this is not the world. And you could then say, well, how does the finite mind cannot perceive the infinite consciousness, right? So we're stuck in a world of names and forms, and we have no access to the infinite consciousness. But the infinite consciousness, the field, pervades everything. We have no access to the Higgs field, right? I can't see it with my eyes, but if there were no Higgs field, none of this would be here, or not in this form, because the Higgs field doesn't give the most mass to objects at all. It gives only a slight mass. The majority of the mass comes from the quark flux inside the atom. Anyway, most of the mass isn't from the Higgs field, but it does produce some of the mass. The Higgs field is then there, present throughout the whole universe. Well, as far as we know, because otherwise mass would not have be able to take on the form it does. So can you experience the Higgs field? Well, you are experiencing the Higgs field because you're present, right? Can you experience the consciousness field? They would say, yes, of course you can. You might be finite in mind and your mind won't be able to grasp it, so there's no point in thinking about it logically, but you are that field ultimately, and therefore if you tune in, meditation, etc., then you would be able to experience that field in the same way that whatever is producing gravity. So let's say there is a theory that gravity is produced in another dimension and bleeds through into our dimension, so the gravity we're experiencing is weak because it has to travel from one dimension to another, and so it's weakened, and what we're experiencing is sort of the gravity through the wall in the other room coming through the wall. Yeah, if we were in the same room, we'd be killed by it, but it comes through the wall, and so it's weakened, and that's what we're feeling, kind of thing. So you could experience the consciousness of the field at a distance, and the effect would be subtle, like gravity is here, very subtle, compared to other forces which are very strong, but you would be able to feel the effects. And they say the effect that you would feel would be inactivity of mind, inactivity of finite mind. And when you go and find the inactivity of finite mind by stilling your finite mind and sitting, then the interpretation from the finite mind, or the finite manifestation, us, the way it appears to us is happiness, bliss, peace. That's the feeling that we get. Gravity to us feels like weight when it bleeds through from the other dimension. Ultimate consciousness feels to us when we quieten the finite mind down by sitting, then a feeling arises of peaceful bliss. That's the field. Like I say, all of these things are only ideas, they're only thoughts, interesting thoughts to think about, interesting ways to doubt the world in which you live. Because doubt it we must, because it shows us all the time that there are faults in our understanding, and maybe we need different forms of understanding to deal with the faults. In diesem Sinne, in this sense, Happy New Year, all the best in 2024, and do not allow those who would be tyrannical and take your freedoms away and the freedoms of the people to have their wicked way. All the best in 2024.